As we continue our special edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm very pleased to bring on our panel. Absolutely wonderful to have Pastor Biff Gore of Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado, and Rabbi Jonathan Hausman of Ahovat Torah Congregation in Stoughton, Massachusetts, to give their thoughts today on the current state of religious liberty in America and some of the key issues involved in that very topic of discussion.
Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers.
Well, what is the current state of religious liberty in America today? Every day when we do a show and you see the very beginning of the program, that live stream intro song, that features someone by the name of Biff Gore, the ambassador of soul, as they call him. He was on season 6 of The Voice. He is a pastor, associate pastor at Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado, and he joins us now for the first time as a guest, although we've played him so many times already here on this program. Pastor Biff Gore, welcome, my friend. It's good to talk with you.
So good to talk with you as well, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm honored to be here and talk about things that are near and dear to my heart and should be near and dear to the country, for the country.
There we go. I was waiting for Nathan's applause for you, Biff. Finally, it's about time, Nathan. You were a little slow on the uptake on that one, and we will be joined in a little while by Rabbi Jonathan Hausman via the telephone. He has a clerical obligation that he's got to wrap up with first. But Biff, let me ask you first, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this religious liberty discussion, how have things been for you from the pastoral side, from your church, Highline Community Church, amidst the pandemic, and also from the musical side, as a musician who, like me, does go around and performs gigs?
From a church standpoint, we were affected in, I want to say, between March and June of last year, but we've been open since then and had regular scheduled services. And secondly, we've been part of our service has been online. We preemptively we have been recording or live streaming our services for the last I want to say 10 years. The music industry, though, the music part of that has been really tough because venues, restaurants, families, weddings, all that stuff has just been put on hold. And so it's been a little tough to bounce back from that. But we do what we can. And I think things are starting to open up as of late. I just hope that, I know our governor just relaxed a bunch of things. I'm just hoping that this isn't getting us set up to be shut down again after the All-Star game. But that's a whole nother topic, Jimmy.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of speculation with the All-Star game coming to Denver, Colorado in July about what the government's policies are right now and what they might be after that game. And I know that it is a tangent, but just real quickly, I would appreciate your thoughts, actually, on the All-Star game leaving Georgia and coming to Colorado. I think we haven't had the chance to talk about it on the show. I know it's a diversion, but just very briefly.
One of the things that really bothers me about it is I'm just so sick and tired of woke culture. The woke supremacists, they can take a common sense bill and politicize it, and then cause Major League Baseball and all these other businesses to just say, hey, you know what? You don't agree with us, so we're going to cancel you. And these companies are so afraid. Shocking to me was what the Major League Baseball's response was, because they have now disenfranchised. And if you're supposedly helping millions of African Americans or blacks in Atlanta, and you take the game away. These are people who've already spent money on advertising. People have spent money on beefing up their staff, money on material goods, and now you take a game away and you put it in a city. You take it from a city that's, I want to say, 60% black to a city that's 10% black. To me, it sounds like the old okey doke. And when you see the people on the left, they just kind of look at it as, hey, we won. No, you didn't win because you're not taking care of your people. I feel, I mean, I have friends that are excited about the All-Star game being here because they saw the excitement of it probably 10 years ago when the Rockies were in the deep in the playoffs and they're actually in the World Series. And that is an excitement, but to disenfranchise a whole city that really needed the economic stimulation from this.
$190 million in economic, or I
Abysmal.
think a billion, might have been 190 billion, but a lot of money in
That's a
economic
lot of money.
benefits to the community.
Yeah, yeah. It really doesn't make any sense, but that's why we're on your show, because we're supposed to make sense out of nonsense.
That's
right?
exactly right. And by the way, I will give you full credit for that line. We were sitting together figuring out the lyrics for the theme song, Biff Gore, and you said making sense out of nonsense, which especially fits because we like to talk a lot about the intersection of politics and economics here on this program. And we'll talk a little bit more about the musical side of that theme song when we bring on Rabbi Hausman, because as you know, he is a very good music aficionado himself, Pastor Biff Gore.
Yes.
But that was a lot of fun, by the way, doing that theme song last year. I can't believe it's well over a year ago now.
Yeah. The thing that I think about with this whole situation is in terms of what's going on with the pandemic. I mean, this is a virus that's obviously killing people. A small amount of people, and we need to take it serious. We need to take every illness serious. But I just think that we're being manipulated, and I'm just glad that we have, the mainstream media is pretty much gone. I don't even watch the regular news anymore, but I'm thankful that for guys like you who are, I mean, you're kind of like that. You're that little voice that's going to get bigger and bigger, and eventually your audience is going to grow to a point that people are going to come to you as a source of information because you have a truth that people are seeking. You're at least putting out the plain facts. I remember calling you in the middle of the election thinking, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And you really kind of talked me down off of the ledge, as so to speak, because because I really was thinking there was going to be I thought there was going to be a real shakeup in Washington. And I know I don't want to change the subject a little bit, but I'm saying this. I appreciate you being a calm voice in the community, in the news community.
Let's talk now about, and I really appreciate that, Biff Gore, Pastor Biff Gore, Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado. Let's talk about what we're seeing amidst the pandemic, amidst cancel culture, all these things when it comes to our religious liberty. Jack Phillips, of course, here in Colorado as well. We interviewed him a little while ago, and that story is just absolutely heart-wrenching. Judge Ken Starr has a brand new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, taking a real macro view while also sharing some micro stories. Pastor Biff Gore, overall, what is your diagnosis of the current state of religious liberty in America today?
We are the frog in the proverbial pot. It's warm right now, but they're getting ready to turn the heat up. It's warm in the sense that, on one hand, I was really impressed with what happened on January 6th. Not the going into the Capitol part, but people actually showing up. People were concerned that they didn't want to get their election stolen. The second piece of that is, I think the church is asleep and we don't see what's happening. And I'm talking, when I say the church, I'm talking about faith communities. There are these attempts to put legislation on the books that would, it sounds like these are equity laws or equity rules or things of equity but they're not. And what they're going to do is they are systematically going to make what we say in the faith community appear to be hate speech, and that they're protecting the 1% of people who might be, transgender or homosexual, and it's absolutely. I think we're in trouble, and unless we really stand up to the bullying and to the real bullying, as I call it, we're not the church, the faith community is not gonna fare well.
Mm. Pastor Biff Gore, I think that Jack Phillips is a very instructive story here to what you're talking about because, and I summed this up a few moments ago, but as he shared, he'll serve anybody. It's not a matter of who that person is. He's going to treat every human being with dignity, respect, and kindness, just as his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ calls him to do. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that he is going to use his, you can see on the screen now, his amazing artistic talents to present a message with which he deeply disagrees because it goes against his religious faith and his religious conscience. This isn't about people not wanting to treat other people with respect because of religious beliefs. It's that they don't want to be forced to set aside their religious beliefs in participating in things with which they disagree on a religious basis or because their conscience stands deeply opposed to it.
Yeah, I stand with Mr. Phillips, and as a matter of fact, I support him. Probably a little too much in my waistline here because every opportunity we get,
Nathan,
we
put that
order.
video back up, please, brother, because I want to excuse everything with Biff Gore and what he's saying about these cakes because they are delicious and amazing. Please go on.
They are absolutely delicious, and there's gluten-free options as well. The one of the things that if I could just summarize what the premise of the Constitution and the right to free speech is, that gives me the ability or the opportunity to agree to disagree with you, not to my detriment though. So if I don't agree with you, that just means that we have an opportunity to debate, and you can either bring me over to your side or I can bring you over to my side. But that doesn't give you the right to shut me down and absolutely, completely destroy my livelihood and my business, or destroy the fact that I want to serve God, and I want to serve Him in a mighty way, and be able to say what the Bible says. Uh, I thought those things were protected under the Constitution.
Well, if you ask Judge Ken Starr and myself as well, they still are. But the question is, to what extent will you call them woke supremacists? Will the left, will the cancel culture be able to suppress religious belief in these ways? You expressed earlier a concern that they might say what's discussed in the pulpit is hate speech and use that as a premise to go after churches. Please expand on, as a pastor, Biff Gore, your concerns in that regard.
Well, there are some there are some things, there are passages in the Bible that are they're not hard sayings to me, but it talks about what sin is. It talks about things like um, excessive drinking, excessive eating, gluttony is a sin. It talks about lying. It talks about um, uh, sowing seeds of discourse as a sin. But it also is pretty plain and clear about sexual preferences and what is a sin, what is defined as a sin in the Bible. And so people can look at that and say, well, your book is a bigoted book because it clearly says that homosexuality is a sin. It also says that uh, uh, sex outside of marriage is a sin. And but you don't have you're going to have groups of people who come after the church because of the church's or the word of God's uh, um, clear stance on social issues.
Pastor Biff Gore, our guest, and there is some difference in the teachings and so forth. For example, as the Catholic faith would say, being gay is not in itself a sin; it's acting on engaging in a variety of different sexual behaviors and whatnot that can be sinful, as the Bible talks about. But Pastor Biff Gore, the fundamental point is not, does anybody like that, or do they agree with it, or what have you? The fundamental point is religious, faithful, and churches being able to discuss and address these issues in a very candid way and without fear that the government or some other outside institution is going to come in and say, nope, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to talk about that. You're not allowed to say that.
Yeah. I mean, we see that we see how heavy-handed our government has been on the church. I mean, just look at the fact that freedom of religion is a tenet, and it is a forefront in our Constitution. And the first thing they shut down was the church, and they left open all the abortuaries and the liquor stores and all of the weed shops, and are punishing churches, were arresting people, giving them tickets as they drove their cars into the parking lot to participate in worship. I'm even thinking about this. I know this is Canada, but there was a pastor who was jailed recently for having a live worship service. And then this whole, each county having its mask mandates and all that. We had to go to the Supreme Court, and I'm thankful that there are churches who understand the law. There are churches who understand that your emergency powers don't supersede church. They don't supersede what the Word of God says, and they don't supersede what our Constitution allows us to do. How does an emergency power take away the power of the people? This is a document that was written by the people and for the people, and just one fell swoop said, "Oh, we have emergency power, so we can do this." All in the name of power and control.
Pastor Biff Gore, excuse me, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, live in Englewood, Colorado. And now I am so privileged and pleased to welcome via the telephone here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, my friend in Stoughton, Massachusetts. He is the rabbi at Ahovat Torah congregation, again, in Stoughton, Massachusetts. I am pleased to welcome, you can put the three-way screen on, please, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. Rabbi, welcome to the show. You're on with Jimmy Sengenberger and Pastor Biff Gore.
Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. Pastor, how are you?
Hey, Rabbi, I'm doing great. So good to hear your voice.
You too, my friend. Once all this craziness is past, I'm planning to come out for a visit.
Oh, awesome. I can't wait to see you and hang out with you.
It will be delightful to have you here. Well, I am so pleased to have you both on. And, I want to step away for just a moment from the serious discussion because, look, we like to have fun here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And one of the cornerstone bits of fun that we have is with our exclusive original theme song that I was so pleased and privileged to be able to put together with none other than season 6 star of The Voice, Biff Gore. And I want to play for just a moment the music video to give a really good welcome to Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, a little bit of the music video of Biff Gore and I doing that theme song for Jimmy at the Crossroads. And then let's get the rabbi's feedback on that and see what you think, Rabbi, of the song that we created. Let's take a listen.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations, oh what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
All right, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, welcome officially to Jimmy at the Crossroads. Tell us your thoughts on the theme song, brother.
It sounds to me like you were listening to a little bit of Magic Dick and Sonny Boy Williamson. That's what it sounds like to me.
You know, we weren't actually, but that would totally be a great time. That's for darn sure.
Well, you know something? When I get out there to meet up with Pastor and the two of us will meet with you, we'll have to do something in the studio with these great harp players over the years.
You know, that would be a lot of fun.
Hey, I'm down for it. I'm down for it. Who do you start with? You know, do you start with little Walter? Do you start with somebody else? That's the problem. Who do you start?
That is the challenge. That's for darn sure. Well, I appreciate you joining. I had to squeeze that in there, Pastor Biff Gore. You know, it is always a delight whenever we have the opportunity, Biff, to have a conversation and talk about what's going on when it comes to music as well as the serious issues of the day. Biff, any quick reflection on that theme song or the rabbi's thoughts before we jump back into the serious discourse?
No, I concur. And I think one of the good things about that's come out of us kind of self-isolating and all that good stuff is the fact that we were allowed to be a little bit more creative. I think when you have time to reflect and sit back, you also have time to think and create. And so, you know, we were able to crank this out, man. And I mean, it was a matter of a day. We wrote the song together in one day, and then you put your guy together, and I got my guy together, and we were able to shoot the video. I mean, I thought it was spectacular.
It was a lot of fun, and it really turned out great, and you are such an exceptional talent, Biff, so I'm so grateful for you to join us in putting together this theme song. It was a great treat to be able to partner with you in that. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, let's jump into our serious topic of the day, which is religious liberty in crisis. We did interviews with Jack Phillips and his attorney, Ryan Bangert, Judge Ken Starr, Pastor Biff Gore, and I have been talking a little bit about what's going on in terms of the current state of religious liberty in America. So I'm going to pass along to you a very broad question, Rabbi, and that is, what is your diagnosis or your sense for where things are at, big picture, when it comes to religious liberty in the country right now?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's not just religious liberty. I think the whole range of rights that are protected by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution are under assault. I wish I could say it's just religious liberty, but it's freedom of speech, it's freedom of assembly, it's the Second Amendment rights. As a matter of fact, I think you just had some bill that was coming through the state legislature there, dealing with the Second Amendment. It's the Fourth Amendment on reasonable search and seizures, and I'll tell you, Alan Dershowitz has spoken at length about this with regard to what happened to America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, over the past few days. You know, and from my vantage point, and I come at this a little bit differently because I do have the law background as well.
Yes.
I have to tell you, what we're seeing here is what relatives of mine who fled the Soviet Union described in terms of government treatment of the citizens in the former Soviet Union. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are supposed to be a restraint on government, not something that can be willy-nilly manipulated by whatever branch of government. And, you know, I here in Massachusetts, we still according to the state legislature and the governor, we still can't open up houses of worship fully. We're still under, it's not a strict lockdown, but, we're doing what we can by way of alternative methods. But being able to gather, can you imagine having a funeral? Jewish funerals happen to be communal experiences. And we have funerals limited to 10, 12 people. Not everybody from the family can join in. It's just, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And I'd like to know where. And Anglo-American common law legal doctrine, all right, it says that individual liberties are wonderful, except in a situation where an emergency has been declared, in which case anything goes and anything can be abrogated.
Again, we're talking with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman in Stoughton, Massachusetts, and Pastor Biff Gore in Englewood, Colorado. Pastor Biff, as you hear what Rabbi Hausman is saying in terms of liberty and the law, that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to have Judge Ken Starr on. Being someone himself of the law, he was a solicitor general. He was a judge on a circuit court of appeals. Of course, he's known for his prosecution of Bill Clinton and what have you. But when we look at the Supreme Court and we look at the law, there's a lot that the Supreme Court has gotten wrong. Make no mistake. But he's pretty optimistic about the current court and its willingness to stand up for religious liberty more and more. I'm wondering, Biff, where you come at that viewpoint. Are you optimistic like Judge Starr, especially with the court that we have thanks to President Donald Trump, or are you more pessimistic? What's your sense?
I'm a little bit more pessimistic in the sense that you look at every session of the court that we've had in the last 50 years, and even the ones that claim to be conservative. I guess I judge things by what was the court like when Roe versus Wade passed? What was the court like? I mean, we use these as talking points and election items that we need to pack the court with, and that may be a bad term, with conservative judges. Democrats come in or liberals come in, and they say we have to pack the court with liberal leaning judges or left leaning judges. I'm just I'm a little bit held reserved because I think we have a few good justices, and then they make decisions that just don't even make any sense to me. It's almost like they are defiers of logic as well. And so it just baffles my mind that something that is clear cut in the Constitution, clear cut in the Bill of Rights, can just be overlooked. I almost think that they're looking at European law sometimes in order to make some of the decisions that they make. As far as religious liberties are concerned and freedom of speech, I think they're getting watered down, and I think that our judiciary, I think they're afraid. I think they legislate afraid instead of looking at the Constitution and legislating from is this constitutional or not?
Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, what's your sense, especially with that JD background as a lawyer, of the Supreme Court? And I'm especially thinking, too, about two different areas of religious liberty. One, we have the restrictions on the faithful and on churches and synagogues and so forth, as you were just alluding to in terms of funeral numbers and attendance. That aspect of restraining religious liberty, but then also what we're seeing increasingly with regards to the so-called cancel culture and this attempt to really enforce a woke ideology upon all Americans.
Well, look, it's not just enforcing a cancel culture. What you're talking about really is pulling out the foundations of all of our personal liberties, and such that you get, like in communist China, like you're rated, and the more points you have, the more ability you have to be able to work around society. It's people today are talking past one another, not debating ideas with one another. And yeah, I mean that's the way I see it. And Jimmy, it's difficult because what you're talking about is balancing liberty, whether it's liberty, religious liberty, freedom of assembly, right to assembly, freedom to speak, freedom of speech. No matter what it is, you talk about this balance of liberty on the one hand and security on the other. And, here we are in this pandemic, and I'm not saying that we should be reckless in our behaviors, but we have not just national, but state governments across the country that have exercised exclusive of woke culture. We have national and state governments across the country that have exercised expansive powers to enact policies in an effort to slow, well, in this case, it's to slow the spread of a virus. Who's to say that, a national emergency won't be declared in some other facet of our national existence, and these expansive powers will be used to enact other policies to limit how we live, how we associate, how we speak, and how we educate others as a society.
Pastor Biff Gore, something is really resonating with me about what Rabbi Hausman is saying, and that is this idea that right now what we could be seeing is the setting of a precedent for the future, and how when other crises come up or situations that they want to amplify in the government, that they now have the precedent for restricting religious liberty in these very overt ways.
I agree. I mean, think about, even in our like I mentioned earlier today, we are frogs in this gigantic pot, and the water is warm, but they're turning it up, and eventually we're going to be caught asleep, and we're not going to have any power or anything to stand on because we gave away all of our rights. And I know that we should, from a public safety standpoint, we should be standing on the side of caution for certain things. But when we give people just absolute authority and power, they abuse it absolutely, as Rabbi was just talking about, and that's what's happening. We see it. We're Jimmy, you can attest to this, and so are you, Rabbi. You're a music aficionado. I mean, you probably know more about music than I do.
And me too.
One of my friends who's a drummer makes this statement about being in a train wreck when a gig's not going well. He says the only thing worse than a train wreck is when you're in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going on right now. We're in the middle of a train wreck, and unless we stand up to the bullies, Rabbi, how you've seen the power grab in Nazi Germany. You saw the power grab with socialism in Italy and all these other places around the world. Probably the latest place is Cuba. That power grab, where a totalitarian regime comes in disguised as we're for the people when they actually are not. And the first thing you attack are the things that really stand up against you. Sure. You saw the quiet revolution in public education. The second revolution is coming in the church. Look at how ridiculously acquiescing some of these churches are. They're not even meeting. I know churches in my community that aren't even open yet.
Yeah. Well, Rabbi, I'd love for you to speak to what Pastor Biff Gore just said, but also he said earlier, Biff did, about his concern that they may soon go into the pulpit and monitor what's being said in the church for hate speech, dovetailing in with cancel culture and wokeness in our daily lives, and going after churches for things and synagogues for things that are said from the pulpit. I welcome your reflections on that as well.
States, but intrusions upon the pulpit are taking place up in Canada. You had a pastor up in, I think it was Ontario, but it might be Alberta, okay, who literally was preaching. Yeah, listen, what was he preaching about? He was preaching about traditional marriage from biblical text, and he was arrested.
That's right.
He was arrested. So, this is already going on. Is it going on here in the United States? Not that I can recall, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening somewhere. Look, all I know is this. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are meant to be a restraint on government. And the Constitution specifically, if you read some of the documents that were written at the particular time, like the Federalist Papers, they will talk about separation of powers within the government and separate spheres of governing, between local, state, and federal. This system was set up specifically to make legislation cumbersome, to change something in order to protect individual liberties. And if there's one thing I know from my family's history, and look, I have family from Central Europe, I have family from Eastern Europe, I have family that lived under the czars and communism, I had family that lived in Central Europe and destroyed by the Nazis. If you give up some of your personal liberties in order to have security, in the end, you will have neither security nor personal liberty.
Ben Franklin, yeah.
Yeah,
Amen.
and listen, it's just an axiom of history. And you show me where the ceding of individual liberties, okay, wherever that's occurred, where those individual liberties were
Restored.
by the way, restored without the resort to civil war or violence.
Right.
Now all this being said, I do have to say we see many examples across the country where individuals and in some cases certain organizations are beginning to push back against what many see as these measures of intrusion, arguing that they are, for the lack of a better phrase, unwarranted violations of basic constitutional rights and personal liberties. And look, there are other people who are arguing, and I know plenty of people around here who say, no, they're justifiable and reasonable emergency powers granted by the government. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Me, it's very simple. What does the Constitution say? What does the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment say? What about the Eighth Amendment? What about the 10th Amendment, reserving undelegated rights back to the states? Okay, all these things are coming into play. And I don't want to leave the three of us or any of the listeners so depressed at the end of this conversation saying there's nothing we can do. There's plenty you can do. It's just like what's taking place across the country amongst local school districts. It was very easy for parents to say, it was very easy for parents to cede control over education to the public schools. Well, now we have COVID, and it was an eye opener. It was an eye opener for a lot of parents. Okay, so they're saying, wait a minute, I thought my was sending my kid to Samuel Staples Elementary School. I don't know, Englewood High School, whatever it is. All right, to be educated. And it seems to me, from what I'm hearing, okay, they're being indoctrinated. It opened a window for parents to see what was happening in the classroom.
Yes.
And a lot of what we see in terms of the fight against our constitutionally enshrined protected liberties, okay, and listen, these are God-given rights, as Pastor Biff will tell you. These are God-given rights. All the Constitution does is protect those God-given rights. But now parents are seeing this is what's happening in the classroom, and a lot of teachers and a lot of school districts are really chafing at this because now they no longer have carte blanche.
Yes.
You take a look at the statistics of the number of parents who are pulling their kids from public schools, placing their kids in private schools, or getting together with a group of parents for homeschooling now.
Yeah. Well, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, I think those are very important words, and I do want to, as we spend just a couple minutes left with Pastor Biff Gore before we got to let him go, Pastor, I want to ask you about what your thoughts are in terms of religious liberty in education. I mean, you are a homeschool father, so you have 7 kids, and they're a homeschooled family, and you were prepared better than most families for this kind of pandemic environment because of course, you've been homeschooling your kids. That wasn't something that was a brand new occasion. But we do have a lot of these court cases in the past on prayer in schools, even voluntary prayer or after school prayer or prayer at sporting events, for school teams and what have you. What's your take on that, and where we go from here as a nation in terms of young people being able to exercise their religious beliefs and speak out about their faith without fear of intimidation or coercion or things like that?
Well, I think the reason we are not preemptive people, I think that we have just been taught that, you work you work your career, you you shop at the same grocery store, you send your kids to the same schools, and you don't make any waves. And people in the faith community have done three things. We checked out from society. And we could change this. We could actually make our world better if we were actively involved in our local school boards and our local politics. Franklin Graham made a statement um, a couple weeks ago, and he said, Franklin said um, that if you ran for office, you might get elected. And I think that is absolutely the case. We need to occupy. God left us here for a reason. He left us here to occupy. And if we don't stand up against the tide of tyranny, it's all on paper right now. We really do have a great chance. But the church, the faith community has to rise up. The entire faith community has to rise up.
Mm. And to that point, we have a Christian pastor and a Jewish rabbi and a Catholic layman here on this program right now. And Nathan Matoush, another Catholic layman here. And we're all talking about coming together in this regard, in this very important fight, because it crosses religious barriers, Rabbi. This isn't a Christian thing or a Jewish thing. When I was seeing what was happening in New York City in terms of the mistreatment of Jewish communities there, it was devastating to me, as COVID seemed to be used particularly against them by the government there. And
right. And
go ahead.
The only, I just want to jump in here because there's a thought that I have. If it can happen to the Jews, it can happen to anyone. Another axiom of history, period.
Mm-hmm.
First the Jews, then it happens to everyone else. And what I find astounding, not just amongst the Jews, but amongst tens of millions of Americans. Look, my youngest brother is an epidemiologist, and we argue about this all the time over the past 13, 14 months. And I say, I'm just astounded how tens of millions of Americans suddenly accepted previously unthinkable, unfathomable restrictions on freedoms as basic as leaving home, gathering for worship, assembling in public, and sometimes assembling in public to worship, running businesses, having elective surgery. It goes all the way down the line, all the way down the line. And listen, I can't speak for Pastor Biff. I can speak for myself. I have to be honest with you. Pandemic or no pandemic, it didn't stop what I had to do as a rabbi, how I'm out there, how I need to serve people. Yeah. Okay? And there was nothing that said that this wasn't urgent. There was nothing that said that this was only temporary. Okay? And it's not the first time we've been faced with a pandemic in this country.
No, it's not, Rabbi. I want to give a last word to Biff Gore, Pastor Biff, before we have to let him go. Please, Pastor.
Yeah, we actually fought a war during a pandemic that killed hundreds of millions of people. And you're absolutely right, Rabbi. I think about, they slaughtered the Jews first. And then the Polish people stood up and they slaughtered them next. And then they went after the disabled. And then they went after the people who were most likely to be resistant. We all have to do our part.
We do. Well, Pastor Biff Gore, I know we got to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate your time as always, my dear friend.
Thank you so much for having me. Rabbi, let's do this. Let's do some blues this year.
All right, Pastor, you got it. I'm coming out.
I'm all for it. Hey, hold on. I got my case right here, Biff. Let me give you a proper center. We should have performed some live music here on the show today, Biff. We'll have to do that some other time.
We will. You see, I always have my axe near me, man.
Anyway,
God bless y'all. And thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for standing for truth, man. God bless y'all. I'm out.
Thank you. You as well. Pastor Biff Gore, Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Well, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, it looks like it's you and me now for a little bit longer. I appreciate you joining on the show. I do want to ask you to speak to, because this fits in with the religious liberty discussion when you're talking about, for example, New York City and how Jewish communities were particularly facing the brunt of the government's overreach and excess when it comes to trampling upon religious liberty in this country and people's ability to gather for faith services, for funerals, so on and so forth. But that also dovetails in with the rise of anti-Semitism that we have had here in this country. A lot of times it seems under the guise of anti-Israeli or sentiment, or under the guise of anti-Israeli policy. Could you speak to that, the tie-in of religious liberty and trampling upon that, along with what we've been seeing in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, Rabbi?
Oh, boy. You got 5 hours?
I got some time.
God, listen, all I can tell you is this. I said to a couple of pastor friends of mine, as a matter of fact, in conversation last week, that while this may seem new to them, I grew up with this. You know, I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where, you know, those of us who were Jewish were under physical and spiritual attack constantly. I remember as a kid, people saying all kinds of epithets in public schools, throwing pennies at the Jewish kids, all kinds of things. And the difference now is that public expression has been legitimated. Okay, 20 years ago, you didn't have public expressions of anti-Semitism like you have it now. It's as simple as that. And with, you know, I was asked a few days ago, Rabbi, do you think that the Democratic Party is anti-Semitic at its core? And I said, no, I don't. I said, I don't think it's anti-Semitic at its core. But what I do believe is that they're so good at circling the wagons that you won't find, for example, what happened to Representative Stephen King out of Iowa. You won't find that on the Democratic side. What Rashida Tlaib or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar says about Israel, and by extension about Jews. So by way of not confronting it, it legitimizes the ability to continue to express it. And you know, it needs to be confronted. It needs to be confronted muscularly. I'll be honest with you. Then again, Jimmy, when am I not honest?
That's exactly right. That's what I was thinking.
Okay. But I'll be honest with you. I take a look at what some of the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations, national Jewish self-defense organizations, how they're responding to this rise in anti-Semitism over the past decade or so, and I find their responses wanting. You know who's published, and that's because for a lot of these organizations, they're only willing to take a look at anti-Semitism as it comes from the right. And I'll be honest with you, it's not that there isn't anti-Semitism from the right, but it's not as ubiquitous as it is from the left. But these organizations are run by and large by people of the left. I'm not saying that being a leftist is bad, but you know, you have to be able to recognize where danger is. And I think that they're missing the mark here. The one organization that seems to me that is really addressing anti-Semitism across the board and its full manifestations, its full efflorescence today happens to be the Family Research Council. They came out with a statement, today's Monday. So they came out with a 57-page position paper on this last Thursday or Friday. That's absolutely magnificent. And I have to say, kol hakavod, with all due honor, respect to Tony Perkins and the executive vice president of the Family Research Council, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. That is Lieutenant General Jerry Blackhawk Down Boykin. Okay, to Chris Gasek and a number of the other people who've been involved with this, none of whom are Jewish. But they take a look at this and they say, if this can happen to Jews, it's a disease for society in its entirety.
Yeah. No, that is so true.
Not really answering your question, but I am speaking to what I see right now.
Right. Well, and the thing is, though, when we have this rise in anti-Semitism, and then there are certain ways to try and code it, to have it hidden underneath something, say criticism of Israel, or using COVID-19 as a basis, like in New York City. I mean, that is a prime example of what was so wrong with the anti-religious liberty policies that we've seen, is what Mayor Bill de Blasio did in New York City last year. And
he allowed protesters to go out unmasked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but would now allow prayer in synagogues, the gathering for Jewish weddings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know why people were surprised about it. It's perfectly keeping within the character if you know about this man's history. But, still, here we are, anti-Semitism is, as it was in a headline in USA Today, not that I read USA Today a lot, but, there was a headline, anti-Semitism is not a punchline. This is America.
Well, yeah. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, when we look at the state of religious liberty in America today, something in terms of practical actions that people can do, I think, is certainly speaking out, speaking up, but that seems so easy to say. What do you think people listening right now or watching right now should do or should keep in mind in terms of ways to stand up for religious liberty against the suppression of expression of religious viewpoints or other forms of expression, and also to stand up against some scourges like what we're seeing in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism?
Well, listen, I'll tell you something. When somebody says religious freedom or religious liberty, there are a few things that come to mind. One is this association part of this, okay? Our ability to go to church, to synagogue, to mosque, whatever it is, to the ashram, okay? People think of freedom of worship, and that's certainly part of it, Jimmy. But, freedom of worship, freedom of religion, I think, is so much more than that. I really think it means, just like in the example of the baker out there, okay? It means that people shouldn't have to go against what their core values happen to be, that people shouldn't have to go against their beliefs in order to conform to culture or to government. And I think that this is really lost on a lot of this. I mean, remember, the First Amendment, if I'm quoting it, if I remember it correctly, and mind you, it's been many, many decades since I've been in law school, and I didn't practice law in the era of constitutional liberties. But what does the First Amendment say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Yes.
That was almost 250 years ago. Okay. And we wouldn't be having this discussion, whether Pastor was part of this discussion up until a few moments ago or moving forward with just the two of us, if this wasn't one of the most pressing issues in American society and American culture today.
Yeah. Well, and something to that point, when you bring up Jack Phillips, who is the baker in Lakewood, Colorado, we had on the show earlier, he's an example of living out his faith in his business. Well, we often heard, for example, former President Barack Obama would say freedom of worship, freedom of worship, freedom of worship, which narrows it down to the churches, which, interestingly enough, they've been able to suppress that given all of the COVID stuff we've been talking about. But broadly speaking, they seem to be acting as though your religion, that's something that you do in church, in your synagogue, in your mosque.
Right.
But when you leave there and you go to your business or you go to your school or what have you, leave that behind and move on. You're not able to incorporate that into your business practices. And the thing, too, about that is when it comes to Jack Phillips, his faith is intrinsic to who he is. And it's not like he is saying to anybody, I'm not going to serve you because you are gay or transgender or any other facet of a descriptor of somebody's life. It's, you want me to make a cake with a certain message that goes against my conscience and my religious faith. I cannot do that. But if you want to come to me for a birthday cake or some other kind of celebration, I'm happy to do that. He can't not incorporate that faith into his day-to-day business practices, Rabbi.
Listen, I'm a rabbi. Pastor Biff's a pastor. You're a practicing Catholic, right?
Yes.
You know, how is it that we can't live our faith? It informs who we are. It informs the choices we make. It informs what we buy. It informs the entertainment that we involve ourselves in. You know, it's a tactic of the left, and a successful one where these basic concepts that constitutional concepts we have been redefined by language. You know, freedom of worship, religious freedom is redefined as freedom to worship. But, you know, it's more than that. It deals with core values. It deals with core beliefs. It deals with these kinds of things. It protects people's right to live, and it protects people's right to speak, and it protects people's right to act according to beliefs, and to do so, by the way, to do so peacefully, and to do so publicly if we want. You know, listen, if you want to preach the gospel to me, you know, call a vote. All due respect to you. But you know something? I have the concomitant right to say, you want to know something, Jimmy? This is terrific, but it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You know, how is it that you can have religious freedom but tell people that they can't be who they are at work, in class, at the gym, at martial arts, at social activities?
Right.
You
well,
know?
It's as though they believe that, not as though, it's pretty clear that they believe that faith is something you just choose. It's like any political beliefs, which is why they're willing to try and suppress conservative political beliefs, for example, oftentimes. But it is something that you just adopt as a set of beliefs, but that's not intrinsic to who you are. And for so many people in this country, it is intrinsic to who you are. And you can't separate that from other aspects of your identity.
Look, and look, I don't want anybody to listen to this broadcast and say, oh, so religious freedom means I have the right to do whatever I want under
Correct.
the cover of religion. Well,
Yes.
The answer to that is no, and the Supreme Court ruled on that over a century ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the Supreme Court said that the federal government may limit religious freedom, but only when it comes to a compelling interest to do so in order to protect the common good and to limit someone's ability to harm another person. Okay, so
Exactly.
you have the peyote tests. You know, back how many decades ago was that? You had the polygamy versus monogamy arguments with regard to Nevada and Utah and wound up being accepted into the union and things of that sort. Okay, you know, it's just not a free for all. There must be some compelling interest. There can be some restrictions, but there are not willy-nilly restrictions for whatever the government wants it to be.
Yeah.
Such that I would argue that, you know, put to the test, I think with de Blasio and Cuomo. I mean, he doesn't get a pass on this either. What they did, you know, or Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan.
Yeah.
I don't think that they get a free pass.
Well, and
okay.
Rabbi, I just want to jump in because we got to let you go in a couple minutes. But one thing that Judge Ken Starr pointed out earlier is he talked about ordered liberty, which is the idea that, yeah, you don't have just carte blanche to do whatever you want, because you have to make sure that in pursuing your rights and actually exercising those rights, recognizing and living your life that you are free to think, free to act, and free to choose. You can do that insofar as it doesn't trample upon other people's rights. And the thing that I think gets so muddied here in this discussion of religious liberty is the idea, for example, that Jack Phillips is somehow impinging on somebody else's rights by not baking that cake and decorating it as they would like. That's not the same thing. That's not what we're talking about in terms of impinging on somebody's rights here. And I think there's an important discussion we need to have in a religious context and in other aspects of liberty as to what a right actually is, how it manifests itself in our daily lives, and when my rights come against your rights.
You know, I heard an argument take place in the grocery store. Today's Monday, so it was this past Friday, where a couple of people were arguing about, interestingly enough, Caitlyn Jenner for one, Bruce Jenner for the other. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the person who said Caitlyn Jenner, she, and the response was, well, but wait a minute, basic biology, no matter what surgery takes place, basic biology is, you know, it's a male. And so what ended up happening is the person who said Caitlyn Jenner is a she accused the other person of discrimination. And I thought about it. I went home and talked to my daughter, who is, you know, slightly on the other side of a lot of these things than I am. And I was talking to my kid, and I said, you know, let me ask you something. As we were discussing, I said, should a florist or a photographer or a baker, since Jack Phillips was just on, or a baker, be forced to provide their services for same-sex weddings and celebrations that violate their religious beliefs? And of course, the response was, well, nobody should be allowed to discriminate. I said, well, let's flip the question then. Should someone who is a lesbian or a homosexual, let's say graphic designer or a printer, be forced to create a pamphlet or a flyer for a religious group's rally that opposes same-sex marriage? You know, and Jacqueline said no. I said, then what's the difference? If it shouldn't be for one, it shouldn't be for the other side as well. Mm. You know, and that doesn't mean that there's a free-for-all. Right. Okay, but it does mean recognizing that there are plenty of options within society. Okay, and just because Jack Phillips may have his religious beliefs does not mean he's denying a service because of who somebody is. Mm-hmm.
Right. That was an important distinction that we got to in our interview with Jack. And actually, it goes back a few years, and I cited this in my conversation with him. We had a live remote for my radio station, a 710 KNUS, at Masterpiece Cake Shop, and a gay man named Mike Jones came and sat down, and we did an interview, and he said, I come here all the time. In fact, Mike testified back in March at Jack Phillips' most recent trial regarding the gender transition cake that he said he didn't want to bake and design. This Mike Jones said, look, I come here all the time. I love the people here. Jack treats me with the utmost respect. I just know that if I want a cake with a certain message that he disagrees with, he's not going to bake that, but that has nothing to do with who I am, and he will still serve me as a human being and treat me with respect and with dignity and with kindness. Right.
So then one has to argue, and I'm sure Judge Starr, I mean, he knows more about this than I do. I'm a peon compared to him when it comes to these things. But, you know, I take a look at the what was it, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and yes. I take a look at what they did, and I say, okay, that's fine. What is the compelling interest for the government of state of Colorado to interfere? Now, that's a hell of a lot different than the government coming in to fight Jim Crow laws, for example, that the laws themselves mandated segregation based on racial supremacy. There's a big difference here, a huge difference. But, you know, we're in an era, Jimmy, where people don't want to listen to these kinds of arguments and involve themselves in the discussion. And what they hear is they'll hear it, a Jack Phillips, and they'll just say, you're a bigot.
Yeah.
Really?
Won't have
That's
those,
your response?
not
That's
even
your
having
response?
that kind of discourse. And, see, here's the thing, too, and I want to wrap up with this point, Rabbi, is that we need to have these kinds of discussions so that you can actually suss out the ideas and find the flawed bad ones. If you are trying to say that anything and everything is bigoted, if it even touches on this little line, you're not going to actually dismiss and get rid of the true bigotry that is in existence. If everything is bigoted, then nothing is bigoted. Instead, you need to actually have those conversations so that people who are genuinely actually embracing truly bigoted ideas can learn that, yes, those are actually bigoted, having a discussion as to why it's so wrong, and hopefully change their ways and start having that conversation within their own hearts and with their own God about where they are coming at things from. And if you can't have those discussions, then you can't actually get at the root of the problem.
Right, and you won't have an ordered, free society, as Judge Starr would say.
Yes.
Okay? That's why the answer is always very important. Does religious freedom mean religious people get special rights? And I would submit that Jack Phillips says, no, I'm not asking for any special rights. When did I ever ask for a special right?
Right.
I'm not asking for that at all. I'm just asking, or I'm just arguing, what is government's compelling interest when there are 10 other bakeries within a mile radius of my bakery who
Right.
be happy to serve these people, and I'm happy to refer you to them.
Yeah, and Rabbi, one other thing that he said is that the harassment from the lawyer who wanted a gender transition cake had been making all sorts of requests for years, that there was a clear understanding that Jack Phillips would never have baked a cake that had anything to do with a marijuana joint or something else. And that's what this same individual kept calling about. So I want to ask you one final big picture question, because we've got to run here. And I know you and I could you said you got 5 hours earlier. We don't, but I know we could go at this for 5 hours, Rabbi. But where do you think we go from here in terms of religious liberty? And what do we need to keep in mind as we fight back and make sure that we protect our constitutional rights that have been endowed by our Creator?
First, the paramount, Jimmy, paramount. I think people need to understand that religious freedom, as I mentioned, the question, as we were just talking a minute ago, religious freedom does not mean that religious people get special rights. Religious freedom does mean the following: religious freedom prevents the cultural majority from using the power of the state to impose their belief on others. And I really think that people have to, it's something that is lost in the discussion. It's lost in this, the muddle that we see generally within the media itself, okay? To understand that religious freedom prevents the cultural majority from using the power of the state to impose their beliefs on others, that necessarily means, all right, the next step of this means that this is a protection for everyone, religious and non-religious alike, from the government becoming so powerful that it can tell you what to do, how to act, what to think, what to eat, what to drink, all the way down the line.
Right. Yeah. They are the all-knowing, all-powerful government in their mind.
Right, which is why the First Amendment starts with religious liberty and then gets to the others, because the founders, I mean, listen, and this was included in the Federalist Papers, okay? The founders of the constitutional order knew that conscience has been considered, they considered conscience to be the individual's most sacred right, sacred right. And a government that intrudes on your conscience will not hesitate to intrude on all of our other freedoms as well.
Rabbi,
I just think it's axiomatic.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, I'm sure we will talk again about this topic sooner than later. My friend, thank you so much for joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads today. Really appreciate it, and a real treat having you and Biff Gore on together again.
And if I may, Jimmy, I want to apologize. I had funerals today, responsibilities in the congregation, so I do apologize for being late.
Please, by all means. I appreciate you taking the time after a funeral to come and join us on this important discussion. It really means a lot.
Thank you. It means a lot to me, too.
Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, God bless you, and take care, my friend.
You too.
Once again, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman of Ahavat Torah congregation in Stoughton, Massachusetts, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Now I am pleased because I want to get the feedback from Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire working the Matoush magic today here, as always, on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I want to get your feedback on the conversations that we've had with Pastor Biff Gore, with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, with Judge Ken Starr, with Jack Phillips, and attorney Ryan Bangert. And my question from the beginning, are you more optimistic or pessimistic based on these various discussions, Nathan? But your overall reactions first, my friend.
Well, first off, Jimmy, I want to thank all these people that came on the show and expressed their views on religious freedom, and it was fascinating conversation, with Ken Starr and Jack Phillips and Rabbi Hausman and Pastor Biff Gore. These are all just great people that are expressing their opinion, and that's what we need to do. I think to figure out this problem is we need to have more people like us stand up and express our opinion, because really I think this whole problem with religious freedom and the government taking over, I think it starts with us. It's happening because people are bowing down to it. People are not standing up, and if people aren't standing up, then the government can do really whatever they want.
So, optimistic, pessimistic. Do you think that there's hope for the future, or are we done and gone pretty much right now, Nathan Matoush?
It's a combination of both. This Constitution was made by brilliant men. Our founding fathers made this Constitution to promote religious freedom, and I think something like that, it's going to be tough to bring down. It's tough to bring down the light of the right.
Well, in this case, even beyond just the light of the right, just the idea of individual liberty. Although right now, those on the right are the greatest advocates for it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. But there's also, a pessimistic side to me as well. With all the control that the government has, and it's not just in religion. Really, it's this cancel culture is swinging everywhere. It's even getting involved in the sports world, as we talked about. The All-Star game, and that being moved to Denver, Colorado. And things like that. This is a worldwide problem, and to me, it's kind of like a pendulum. How far, is cancel culture going to go, and how far
will it swing back?
Yeah, will it swing back? I think it has a lot to do with just kind of sitting back and seeing what happens. But really, at the end of the day, I think this starts with us.
It does, and we, like I was saying with the rabbi, we have to have these conversations because you can't root out true evil and true bigotry and true hate unless you're actually willing to say we're going to identify it when it's really happening, as opposed to saying blanketly we're going to classify anything that fits this mold underneath this rubric or this banner. Because you can't get anywhere, Nathan, if you're doing that.
Yeah, exactly, and it starts with us. And what's baffling me is, you and I are both Catholic, and the COVID restrictions and everything like that. There were a lot of churches closed down for a bit, and it was hard to go to church, during that too, because you had to sign up, and some churches, you had to wear a mask and social distance, and really there was only one church, I think, that literally said, heck with all the rules, all the masks and everything. That was Our Lady of Mount Carmel down in Littleton, but. These other churches, they're, I feel like they're kind of being threatened, kind of in a way, like, hey, you got to close down or we're shutting down your church. Maybe it's that, but also like you look at the Vatican and stuff like that, and they're not really doing anything. They're just kind of letting the government just, push them around and tell them what to do. And I think that's where I go on the pessimistic side, is when you look at the Vatican, and I love Pope Francis. I pray for him every day, and things like that. But there's just something going on. There's something going on where I see, churches just, bowing to the government, bowing to all the mandates and things like that. And to a certain point, I understand, like, early on in the pandemic and stuff like that. But It's a mystery to me.
There has been a lot of capitulation among so many faith communities where it makes you scratch your head and say, why aren't you standing up more for your rights? In this case, that are guaranteed or protected under the U.S. Constitution in the United States of America, but anywhere around the globe, is why are you not willing to stand up for your natural rights as human beings when it comes to faith or speech or press or what have you, when you're allowing those things to be taken away by government for a particular crisis situation? Now, sometimes, like you said, maybe in the beginning, there's some merit to some of these restrictions, but it has just gone on for far too long and to such an extreme extent, which is exactly why I really wanted to have this discussion today, Nathan, with all of our guests and delving in depth. This is the longest show that we have done probably ever, if not at least since the fall of or summer of last year when we did our special report on what happened downtown Denver.
Yeah.
But bottom line is we have a lot of discourse that we need to have on this and engage with people with whom we disagree. Now, we've all been on the same page today, but it is important to have discussions with people with whom we disagree as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think persuade and stand up and have more of these conversations is the way to go. But I think to answer your question, I don't think I really answered it fully because there's so much going on. I think I'm half and half. I'm kind of on the fence. You kind of got to see what happens, I think, in the government. We had a previous administration that stood up to stuff like this. So if we can get someone like that coming back in the next 4 years or, the midterms, if we could get more people standing up like that, I think we'll be fine. But, cancel culture it's way too far up,
all right,
up on the pendulum, up on the scale.
Nathan Matoush, I think that's well said, my friend. Thank you so much for working the Matoush magic once again today. What a great show.
Oh, thank you. Great show. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Once again, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads into the discussion here on the program.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.